The cargo crate was heavy, lifted it anyway. He had been lifting heavy things for a long time, longer than most people could imagine. His arms did not shake. His back did not bend. He simply lifted, carried, and placed the crate where it needed to go. Then he returned for the next one. Orbital Station Vega 7 was the largest diplomatic hub in this part of the galaxy. Ships from 47 different species docked here every day. Politicians, generals, traders, and scientists walked through its polished corridors. They wore fine clothes and spoke important words. They made decisions that affected billions of lives. Wore a gray uniform with grease stains on the sleeves. He worked in the lower decks where the air recyclers hummed and the lights flickered. Nobody important ever came down here. That was exactly why he liked it. He was a man of average height with a face that looked somewhere around 45 years old. His hair was black with some gray at the edges. His eyes were dark and quiet, like deep water that had not moved in a very long time. If you passed him in a corridor, you would not look twice. He was just another worker, just another human doing a simple job. That was how he wanted it. 3 levels above him, the Grand Assembly Hall was filled with noise and color. Delegates from across the coalition had gathered for the annual military summit. Giant creatures sat next to small furry beings. Tall reptilian warriors stood beside floating jellyfish-like entities that communicated through light pulses. The diversity of intelligent life was on full display. Humans occupied a small section near the back. There were only 12 of them in the hall. Earth had joined the Galactic Coalition just 30 years ago, and humanity was still considered a young species, a junior member. Some of the older races had been traveling between stars for 10,000 years. To them, humans were like children who had just learned to walk. Park sat among the human delegation. She was 28 years old with sharp eyes and a quick mind. She worked as a cultural liaison, which meant she spent most of her time explaining human customs to aliens who found them strange. Today, she was simply observing. The military summit was not her area, but she had been curious enough to attend. At the center of the hall, Admiral stood on the main platform. He was tall, even by alien standards, with a hard shell covering his body and 4 arms that moved with mechanical precision. His species, had been warriors for 6,000 years. They were proud of this history, very proud. The coalition faces many threats, said, his voice amplified through translation devices so all species could understand. Pirates, rogue AI swarms, the hollow machine consciousness that threatens our outer colonies. We must be prepared, we must be strong. Many delegates nodded in agreement. I propose a combat readiness review, continued. Each member species will submit their military records for evaluation. We will rank our forces based on experience, capabilities, and proven results. This will help us coordinate our defenses more effectively. The proposal was approved quickly. Most species were eager to show off their military histories. They had fought in campaigns lasting centuries. They had wars that spanned entire star systems. They had legends of battles that shook planets. When it came time for Earth to submit its records, a junior officer uploaded the files to the central database. It was a routine action. Nobody expected anything interesting. Delegate was the first to notice the human files. He was an amphibian creature with wet, glistening skin and large eyes that blinked sideways. His species, considered themselves intellectuals and philosophers. They looked down on younger races with a special kind of arrogance. Let us examine the human military records, said, his voice carrying a tone of amusement. I am curious what our members consider warfare. The display screen lit up with a random file, read the service number and name aloud. Human male, service record spanning, paused and blinked. This must be an error. The record spans over 200 years. Laughter rippled through the chamber. Humans did not live for 200 years. Everyone knew that. Continue anyway, Admiral said. waving one of his four arms. Let us see what stories the humans tell about themselves. Scrolled through the file. Listed conflicts: Korean War 1951-953, Vietnam Conflict 1965-1973, Gulf Wars 1991 and 2003, Syrian Theater 2015-2024, Taiwan Strait Crisis 2027, Arctic Resource War 2089-2094, First Contact Defense 2112, Titan Rebellion 2147, Uprising 2156. Colony Siege 2203. The list went on and on and on. More laughter filled the hall. The alien delegates found this hilarious. Korean War, one officer said mockingly. What is a Korea? Is it a planet? Vietnam Conflict, a commander added. Conflict, not even a proper war, how cute. These are not wars, declared loudly. These are skirmishes, playground fights. My species has fought single campaigns that lasted longer than humanity has existed as a civilization. The human delegation sat in uncomfortable silence, felt her face grow hot with embarrassment. She wanted to say something in defense, but what could she say? Compared to alien wars that lasted, human conflicts did seem small. In the lower decks, placed another cargo crate on the transport belt. He had no idea that his name was being spoken in the Grand Assembly Hall above him. He did not know that his file was being displayed for everyone to see. He just kept working, one crate after another, the same way he had been doing for a very, very long time. Back in the assembly hall was enjoying himself. Look at these injury reports, he said with delight. Gunshot wounds, chemical exposure, radiation damage. These humans fight with such primitive methods. It is almost adorable. More laughter, more mockery. But sitting near the back of the human delegation, Commander was not laughing. She was not even smiling. Her face had gone pale, and her hands were gripping the arms of her chair so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She knew that name. She had seen that service number before. Was 58 years old. She had served in the Earth Defense Force for 35 years. She had seen combat on 3 different worlds. She thought she had seen everything. But when she was 22, fresh out of the academy, she had served briefly during the uprising. It was a short assignment, only 3 months. But during those 3 months, she had met a man who looked exactly like the cargo worker currently loading boxes in the lower decks. That was 36 years ago. The man had not aged a single day. Leaned toward and whispered urgently, "They need to stop reading that file, right now." Looked at her with confusion. "Why, what is wrong?" Before could answer, continued reading. "Wait, there is something strange here. The same service number appears in every conflict listed. The exact same number, across 200 years of records." The laughter in the hall began to fade. Delegates looked at each other with confusion. "That cannot be correct," Admiral said, leaning forward with sudden interest. "Human are limited, 80 years, perhaps 100 with advanced medicine, not 200. Perhaps it is a family tradition," suggested. "Father passes the number to son." "No," said, standing up suddenly. Her voice was loud enough to carry across the hall. "That is not how our service numbers work. Each number is unique, assigned once, never reused." The chamber fell silent. All eyes turned to the human commander. "Then explain this record," demanded. "Is it a forgery, a mistake in your database?" Took a deep breath. She looked at the file displayed on the giant screen. The name, the number, the endless list of wars. "It is not a mistake," she said quietly. "That file is real. Every word of it is true." Felt a chill run down her spine. She did not understand what was happening, but she could feel the atmosphere in the room changing. The mockery was gone. Something else was taking its place. Something like fear. Set down his display tablet slowly. His sideways blinking eyes had stopped moving. "You are saying," he said carefully, that one human served in all of these conflicts, one individual for over 200 years. Nodded yes. That is impossible. I agree, said, and yet there he is, on your screen, every battle, every war, every nightmare humanity has faced since he first picked up a weapon. She paused and looked directly at. Do you want to know the most interesting part of his record, Delegate? Said nothing, he just stared. Pointed at the screen. Look at the casualty reports. Look at the survival lists. In every single conflict listed, that man was the sole survivor of his unit, every single time. The silence that followed was so complete that could hear her own heartbeat. And somewhere in the lower decks, put down his cargo crate and wiped the sweat from his forehead. His break was coming up soon. He was thinking about what to eat for lunch. He had no idea that the galaxy was about to learn what it meant to be human. The Grand Assembly Hall had never been so quiet. Delegate stood frozen at the central platform, his wet skin glistening under the bright lights. His large eyes moved slowly across the data displayed on the screen before him. He was looking for an error, a mistake, anything that would explain what he was seeing. He found nothing. Admiral rose from his seat, his forearms clasped behind his back. The commander was no longer amused. His species had fought wars across 1,000 worlds. They understood warriors. They understood death. But this was something else. Commander said, addressing directly, you claim this record is authentic, but what you are describing is impossible. No biological creature can survive for 200 years, especially not a human. Remained standing. Her hands had stopped shaking, but her voice was still tight. I am not claiming anything, Admiral. I am simply telling you what I know. That file belongs to a real person, a person I have met, a person who is currently on this station. Murmurs spread through the chamber like ripples in water. Delegates turned to each other with confusion and disbelief. The warriors shifted in their seats uncomfortably. The floating entities flickered with agitated light patterns. This is absurd, declared, trying to recover his dignity. You are playing some kind of joke on us. Humans are known for their strange sense of humor. There is no joke, said firmly. If you do not believe me, bring in a historian AI. They cannot lie. They can only report facts. Considered this for a moment. Then he nodded. Very well, summon a historian unit. The wait was short. Within minutes, a floating sphere entered the chamber. It was silver and featureless, about the size of a human head. This was a historian-class artificial intelligence, one of the most advanced data verification systems in the galaxy. They were used in courts, treaty negotiations, and historical archives. Their accuracy was absolute. Historian Unit 774 reporting, the sphere announced in a neutral voice. What information do you require? Gestured toward the display screen. Verify the authenticity of this military service record. Human designation. Service number 40 for 197782 Delta. The historian unit was silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then it spoke. Record, all data is authentic. No alterations detected. No fabrications detected. This file represents a complete and accurate service history for the individual designated. The chamber erupted in noise. Delegates shouted questions. Some demanded more tests. Others simply stared in disbelief. Silence, commanded. The noise died down. He turned back to the historian. Explain how this is possible. Humans do not exceed 120 years, even with the best medical technology. I do not have access to biological data, the historian replied. I can only verify records. The records show that this individual has been continuously active in military service for 214 years. The method of his survival is not documented. Park sat in her chair, barely breathing. She had come to this summit out of curiosity. She had expected boring speeches about fleet deployments and defense budgets. Instead, She was watching the entire galactic leadership discover something that even most humans did not know. Someone had been fighting humanity's wars for over 2 centuries, and he was still alive. Delegate was scrolling through the file again, this time with trembling hands. "The casualty reports," he said slowly. "I want to see the casualty reports from each conflict." The historian unit projected the data onto a larger display. Numbers filled the screen. Names, dates, death tolls. "Korean War," read aloud. "Human forces in his unit 42, survivors 1." Nobody laughed. "Vietnam conflict, unit strength 38, survivors 1." The officers exchanged dark glances. "Gulf War, unit strength 51, survivors 1." A commander leaned forward, his reptilian eyes narrowing. "First contact defense." His voice was barely a whisper now. "Human forces in combat zone 4,200, survivors 1." Felt sick. She understood what she was hearing: every battle, every war, everyone died except him, not once, not twice, every single time. "Titan Rebellion," continued, his voice cracking. "Battalion strength 1,100, survivors 1." "Stop," someone called out. It was a delegate, a massive creature with thick gray skin and tusks protruding from its lower jaw. "We understand the pattern. How many wars in total?" The historian answered immediately. "The individual designated has participated in 47 confirmed military conflicts. In 32 of those conflicts, he was the sole survivor of his immediate unit. In 11 conflicts, he was the sole survivor of his battalion. In 4 conflicts, he was the sole survivor of all human forces engaged in the combat theater. 4 times. 4 times he had been the only human left standing on an entire battlefield." Admiral slowly sat back down. His 4 arms hung limply at his sides. For a species that had fought wars for 6,000 years, they understood something that the politicians did not. They understood what it meant to be the last one alive. They understood the weight of watching everyone around you die. And they understood that no ordinary soldier could experience that 47 times and still be functioning. "What happened to him?" asked quietly. "Physically, mentally, what injuries has he sustained?" The historian unit displayed a new set of data: medical records, treatment logs, recovery reports. Gunshot wounds, 37 separate incidents. Stab wounds, 14 incidents. Chemical weapon exposure, 9 incidents. Radiation exposure, 7 incidents, including 2 at near-lethal levels. Vacuum exposure, 4 incidents with one lasting 3 minutes and 12 seconds. Cybernetic plague infection, 1 incident, full recovery. Burn damage covering more than 50% of body surface, 3 incidents. Limb loss, 2 incidents, both regenerated through unknown means. Regenerated, caught that word. Limbs do not regenerate. Humans do not regenerate limbs. The delegate spoke again. "You said regenerated through unknown means. Explain." "Insufficient data," the historian replied. "Medical records indicate that the individual lost his left arm during the Titan Rebellion and his right leg during the colony siege. In both cases, the limbs were fully restored within 6 months. The process is not documented. No surgical intervention is recorded." The chamber was silent again, but this time the silence had a different quality. Before there had been shock and disbelief. Now there was something closer to fear. Commander finally spoke again. "I met him 36 years ago during the uprising. He looked exactly the same as he does now, same face, same age. He has not changed at all." "What is he?" asked. The mockery was completely gone from his voice. He sounded like a child asking about monsters in the dark. "He is human," said simply. "Just a human, but there is something about him that we do not understand. Something that keeps him going, something that refuses to let him die." Stood up again. He walked slowly to the central platform, his heavy footsteps echoing in the quiet hall. "Where is this human now?" The historian answered. Current location, Orbital Station Vega 7, Deck 7, Cargo Processing Section 4. Employment status, cargo handler. Shift ends in 4 hours and 17 minutes. The most remarkable soldier in human history was moving boxes in the basement. Turned to look at the human delegation. His expression was unreadable. I want to speak with him. Bring him here. Shook her head. I don't think that's a good idea, Admiral. He doesn't like attention. He has spent decades avoiding it. I am not asking, said firmly. The coalition needs to understand what we are dealing with. If this human is as the records describe, he may be the most valuable military asset in the galaxy, or the most dangerous. Either way, I need to see him for myself. Looked at, something passed between them, an understanding, a warning. Fine, said, but I am coming with whoever you send, and I am warning you now, Admiral. Do not treat him like a specimen. Do not treat him like a weapon. He has been through things that would break any other soldier in this room. The only thing keeping him together is the simple life he has built for himself. He works in cargo, said with disbelief. After all those wars, he moves boxes. Yes, replied, because boxes don't shoot back, because crates don't die in his arms, because cargo holds don't turn into mass graves. She paused and let her words sink in. He chose that job for a reason. He is trying to find peace. I suggest you let him keep it. But was already giving orders. Guards were dispatched. A formal summons was prepared. Stood up. I will go, she said quietly. I am a liaison officer. It is my job to communicate with humans on behalf of the coalition. Let me talk to him first. Considered this. Then he nodded. Very well, but do not take long. The summit cannot continue until we understand what we have discovered today. Walked toward the exit, her heart pounding in her chest. She was about to meet a man who had seen 2 centuries of war, a man who had watched countless friends die, a man who should have died himself 100 times over. She did not know what to say to him. She did not even know if he would talk to her. But as she stepped into the corridor and began her journey to Deck 7, she realized something important. The aliens had spent the last hour laughing at humanity. They had mocked human wars as small and insignificant. They had dismissed human soldiers as primitive and weak. They were not laughing now. And somewhere in her mind, a small voice whispered that this was exactly what it meant to be human. Not the biggest, not the strongest, not the oldest, but something else entirely. Something that refused to stop. Something that survived. Deck 7 smelled like machine oil and recycled air. Walked through corridors that grew narrower and darker as she descended deeper into the station. The polished floors of the upper levels gave way to metal grating. The bright lights became flickering panels. The voices of politicians and delegates faded into the constant hum of engines and life support systems. She had never been down here before. Most people who lived on the upper decks never came to these levels. It was a different world, a hidden world that kept the station running while everyone above lived in comfort. She found him in Cargo Processing Section 4. Was sitting alone in a maintenance corridor, his back against the wall. He had a small metal container in his hands. Lunch. Just rice and vegetables. Nothing special. He ate slowly, carefully, like a man who had learned never to take a meal for granted. He looked up when approached. His eyes found hers immediately. They were dark and calm, but something moved in their depths. Something ancient. Something tired. You are from the summit, he said. It was not a question. Stopped a few meters away from him. She had prepared a speech in her head, a formal introduction, an explanation of why she was here. But standing in front of him, all those words disappeared. Yes, she said simply, I am Park, Cultural Liaison. Nodded slowly. He put down his food container and wiped his hands on his gray uniform. They found the file. Again, not a question. He already knew. How did you started? Because they always find the file, said. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. I have been through this before, different planets, different stations, different people asking the same questions. He looked at her with those deep, unreadable eyes. How much did they see? Everything, I think. The wars, the survival rates, the medical records. Closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, there was a sadness there that could not fully understand. Then they know about the regeneration. Yes, he sighed. That always makes things complicated. Took a step closer. She did not know what she expected to find when she met this man. A warrior, a monster, a superhero. But what she saw was just a tired man eating lunch alone in a dark corridor. He did not look dangerous. He looked lonely. They want to see you, she said. Admiral and the other delegates, they have questions. Stood up slowly. He was not tall, not physically impressive. Just an average man with average features and eyes that had seen too much. Of course they do, he said. They always have questions. He began walking toward the lift that would take them to the upper levels. Fell into step beside him. For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were their footsteps on the metal floor and the distant rumble of cargo transport systems. Then spoke, his voice distant. You know what the hardest part is. It is not the dying, I have done that. Many times, bullets, fire, poison, cold. Each time I think it is finally over. Each time I close my eyes and wait for peace. He paused by a window that looked out into the cargo bay. Hundreds of crates were stacked in neat rows. Machines moved them with mechanical precision. Everything was orderly, controlled, safe. But then I wake up, he continued. Sometimes in a hospital, sometimes in a ditch, sometimes buried under bodies. His jaw tightened. I always wake up. No matter what kills me, I always wake up. Did not know what to say. What could anyone say to something like that? The first time was Korea, said. 1951, winter, so cold that the rivers froze solid. My unit was crossing a valley when the enemy attacked. Machine guns, mortars, everything at once. He was staring at something far away, something only he could see. I was hit in the chest, twice. I fell into the snow and watched my blood turn the ice red. I watched my friends die around me, and then everything went dark. He turned to look at directly. When I woke up, 3 days had passed. The bodies were frozen solid. I was the only one still warm, still breathing. I did not understand what had happened. I thought maybe God had made a mistake. They started walking again. The lift was just ahead. Vietnam was worse, said. The jungle, the heat, the things that crawled in the darkness. I died there too more than once. Explosion took my legs in 1968. I lay in a river for 2 days waiting for death. When I woke up, my legs were back, whole, perfect, like nothing had happened. Felt a chill despite the warm air. How is that possible? I do not know, admitted. Doctors have studied me. Scientists have taken samples. Aliens have scanned every cell in my body. Nobody understands it. I regenerate, I recover, I survive. There is no explanation. There is just the fact of it. They entered the lift. The doors closed around them. The Titan rebellion was the worst, said quietly. The lift began to rise. 2147. Methane storms on a frozen moon. We were fighting colonists who wanted independence. Or maybe we were the bad guys. It is hard to remember after so many wars which side was right. He leaned against the lift wall, suddenly looking older than his face suggested. There was a soldier named, she was young, 23, smart, brave. She reminded me of someone I knew a long time ago. His voice cracked slightly. She asked me once how I stayed so calm in combat. I told her that after enough battles, fear becomes just another feeling, like hunger or tiredness. You learn to live with it. The lift slowed as it approached the upper levels. She died in my arms, said. A piece of metal went through her chest. There was nothing I could do. I held her hand until her eyes went empty, and then I had to keep fighting, because that is what I do. That is all I know how to do. The doors opened. The bright lights and polished floors of the diplomatic level greeted them. Stepped out first, followed more slowly. He looked out of place here, his gray uniform, his grease-stained sleeves. He was a worker among politicians, a soldier among diplomats. Commander was waiting for them in the corridor. She had left the assembly hall to meet them. When she saw, her face showed a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, respect. "It has been a long time," she said to him. 36 years, replied. "You got older." Smiled sadly. "You did not." "I never do." They stood there for a moment, two soldiers who had shared a battlefield decades ago. One had aged naturally. The other had not aged at all. It was strange and heartbreaking at the same time. "They are going to ask you questions," warned. "The admiral, the politicians. They are going to treat you like a science experiment or a weapon." "I know," said. "They always do." "You do not have to go in there." Shook his head. "Yes, I do. If I hide, they will just find me again. They always find me." He straightened his shoulders and for a moment saw something change in him. The tired cargo worker disappeared. In his place stood someone harder, someone who had faced death 1,000 times and kept walking. "Besides," added, his voice carrying a hint of dark humor, "maybe this time they will learn something. Every species thinks they understand war. Every species thinks they know what it means to survive." He started walking toward the assembly hall doors. "Perhaps it is time I show them what humans are really made of." And exchanged glances, then they followed him. The doors to the Grand Assembly Hall opened. The noise inside stopped immediately. 47 species stared at the human cargo worker as he stepped into the chamber. Politicians who had ruled entire planets, warriors who had conquered star systems, scientists who had unlocked the secrets of the universe. All of them looked at, and for the first time in his very long life, did not try to hide what he was. He let them see. The weight in his eyes, the scars that did not show on his skin but existed somewhere deeper, the exhaustion of a man who had been fighting since before most of their civilizations reached for the stars. He walked to the center of the chamber, alone, unarmed, just a man in a cargo worker's uniform. But something in the way he moved made even the warriors lean back in their seats. Something in his calm, steady gaze made the politicians grow quiet. Something about him felt like standing at the edge of a cliff in the dark, knowing there was danger below but not being able to see it. Admiral stood slowly. For a long moment he said nothing. Then finally he spoke. "You are the survivor." Met the Admiral's 4 eyes without flinching. "I am," he said simply, "and I have been surviving for a very long time." The Grand Assembly Hall was filled with the most powerful beings in the galaxy. There were admirals who commanded fleets of 10,000 ships. There were generals who had conquered entire planets. There were politicians who controlled economies larger than some civilizations. They had gathered here to discuss military readiness, to compare war records, to measure strength against strength. And now they were all staring at a man in a gray uniform who smelled faintly of machine oil. Stood at the center of the chamber, surrounded by empty space. Nobody wanted to stand too close to him. Even the guards who usually positioned themselves near important speakers had stepped back without realizing it. Something about the human made them uncomfortable. Admiral stepped down from the platform and walked toward. The commander moved with the careful grace of a lifelong warrior. His 4 arms were clasped behind his back, but noticed that his secondary limbs were positioned near his belt, where she assumed weapons might be hidden. Even was nervous. "I apologize for the earlier mockery," said formally. "We did not understand what we were looking at." Nodded slightly. "Apologies are not necessary, Admiral. I am used to being misunderstood." Delegate had recovered some of his composure. He stepped forward, though he stayed several meters away from. "We have questions, many questions. The coalition needs to understand what you are." "I am human," said calmly, "nothing more." "That cannot be true," insisted. "Humans do not regenerate limbs. Humans do not survive for 2 centuries. Humans do not walk away from extinction-level battles as the only survivor. His large eyes blinked rapidly. You are something else, something modified, something engineered. Turned to look at directly. The delegate took an involuntary step backward. I have been studied by the best doctors on Earth, said. I have been examined by alien scientists from a dozen species. They have taken my blood, my tissue, my cells. They have scanned my brain and mapped my DNA. He paused. They found nothing. No modifications, no enhancements, no genetic alterations. I am baseline human, completely ordinary in every measurable way. Then how do you explain your survival? Asked. His expression did not change. I cannot explain it, neither can anyone else. Some things simply are. A commander stood up from his seat. His reptilian scales were dark green, and his eyes glowed with internal fire. They were famous for their directness in matters of combat. You have survived 47 wars, they said. In many of those battles, you were the only one left alive. Either you are the greatest soldier ever born, or you are a coward who fled while others died. Which is it? The chamber grew very quiet, held her breath. She saw Commander's hand move toward the sidearm she carried, but raised his hand slightly, telling her to stand down. He walked toward the commander. His steps were slow, measured, unhurried. There was nothing threatening about his movement, but somehow that made it more unsettling. He moved like something that did not need to rush because it knew, absolutely knew, that nothing could stop it. The guards reached for their weapons, raised a hand, signaling them to wait. Stopped directly in front of the commander. The alien was much larger than him, towering over the human by at least half a meter, but size suddenly seemed irrelevant. I have watched friends drown in their own blood, said quietly. His voice carried through the silent hall without effort. I have held the hands of soldiers as alien parasites ate them from the inside. I have breathed vacuum for 3 minutes and 12 seconds while crawling back to a ship that was falling apart around me. The commander's glowing eyes flickered. I have been shot more times than you have scales on your body, continued. I have been burned until my skin turned black. I have been frozen until my heart stopped beating. I have been irradiated until my bones glowed. Every time I thought I was finally free. Every time I woke up again. He leaned slightly closer to the alien, despite being twice his size, leaned back. I did not survive because I ran, said, his voice dropping even lower. I survived because whatever killed everyone else was not enough to kill me. Nothing has ever been enough to kill me. He paused. And believe me, I have tried. The last 3 words hung in the air like poison. The commander sat back down. He said nothing more. Delegate cleared his throat nervously. You tried to die. Turned to face the assembly. His expression was completely calm, but there was something terrible behind his eyes. Imagine watching everyone you love grow old and die while you remain unchanged. Imagine making friends who become dust while you still breathe. Imagine falling in love, knowing that you will bury them in a few decades while you continue walking through centuries. His voice never rose above a conversational tone, but every word struck like a hammer. Imagine fighting war after war, watching soldiers die around you, knowing that you will be the one writing letters to their families while you walk away without a scratch. Felt tears forming in her eyes. She had not expected this. She had not expected to feel sorry for him. In 2089, I walked into the Arctic Ocean and let myself freeze, continued. I was under the ice for 4 months. When spring came, I thawed. I woke up on a fishing boat that had pulled my body from the water. They thought I was a miracle. Nobody spoke. In 2156, I flew my ship into an asteroid field during the uprising. The impact broke every bone in my body. I drifted in space for 6 days before rescue arrived. By the time they found me, my bones had healed themselves. Sat down heavily. For a warrior who had fought for 6,000 years, he suddenly looked very young. Every method I have tried has failed, said. The universe refuses to let me rest. So instead of fighting that fact, I learned to accept it. I found work that does not involve killing. I move cargo. I live quietly. I try not to think about the past. He looked at the assembly with those ancient, tired eyes. But you found my file. You pulled me back into the light. You made me remember all the things I spend my days trying to forget. For the first time, something like anger flickered across his face. And for what? To satisfy your curiosity, to make yourselves feel better about mocking humanity. The silence that followed was crushing. Admiral finally spoke, his voice subdued. We meant no offense. We simply did not understand. No, agreed. You did not understand. You laughed at human wars because they seemed small compared to your great campaigns. You mocked our conflicts because they lasted years instead of centuries. He paused. But you missed the point entirely. What point? Asked, almost whispering. His eyes swept across the chamber, meeting the gazes of politicians and warriors from every major species in the galaxy. You count your wars in centuries because you have the luxury of time, he said. You measure victory in conquered star systems and subjugated populations. Your conflicts are slow, methodical, almost civilized by comparison. He shook his head. Human wars are different. We fight fast. We fight hard. We fight with everything we have because we know our lives are short and our enemies will not wait. He turned to look at the warriors specifically. Your species spent 6,000 years building an empire. Impressive. But in those same years, humanity fought ourselves nearly to extinction a dozen times, clawed our way back each time, reached for the stars, fought alien invaders, colonized other worlds, and survived every disaster the universe threw at us. His voice hardened. We did all of that in less than 300 years, because we do not have time to waste on careful, measured warfare. We burn hot. We burn fast. And we do not stop until either we win or everything is ashes. The officers exchanged uncomfortable looks. You look at my record and see a man who refused to die, continued. But that is not just me. That is all of humanity. We refuse to die. We refuse to surrender. When the galaxy tells us we cannot survive, we survive anyway. When the universe pushes us down, we get back up, every single time. He walked back to the center of the chamber and stood there, a small human figure surrounded by aliens who suddenly seemed much less confident than they had an hour ago. You wanted to know what I am, said. I am exactly what every human is, just more concentrated, more distilled. The same stubbornness that keeps any human fighting against impossible odds by 200 years of practice. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the station's alarms began to scream. Red lights flashed across the assembly hall. Emergency announcements blared from every speaker. Immediately began issuing commands into his communicator. Guards rushed to their posts, grabbed a nearby console and pulled up the station's sensor data. What she saw made her blood run cold. Unknown vessels, she announced, her voice shaking. At least 30, they just dropped out of hyperspace. They are surrounding the station. Identification demanded. The sensor data scrolled across the screen. Then a single word appeared. Hello. The machine consciousness. The relentless enemy that had destroyed 12 coalition worlds. The threat they had gathered here to discuss. It had found them first. Looked at the flashing red lights. He looked at the panicking delegates. He looked at the chaos erupting around him. And then very quietly he sighed. One more war, he muttered to himself. There is always one more war. He turned and began walking toward the exit, ran after him. Where are you going? She called out. Did not stop walking. To find weapons, to find a plan, to do what I have always done. What is that? He glanced back at her, and for just a moment she saw something in his eyes that might have been dark humor. Survive. The station shook as the first weapon struck the outer hull. Grabbed a support beam to steady herself. Around her, delegates were screaming and running toward escape pods. The polished floors of the diplomatic level were suddenly filled with chaos. Politicians who had argued about military strength minutes ago were now pushing each other aside in their rush to flee. Kept walking. He moved against the crowd, heading deeper into the station while everyone else ran toward the exits, followed him without understanding why. "Where are we going?" she shouted over the noise. "Deck 12, maintenance section." "Why?" "Because that is where the useful things are stored." They reached a lift just as another impact made the walls tremble, stepped inside and began descending while the station fell apart around them. Through the transparent lift walls could see the space outside. Dark shapes moved between the stars. The hollow drones were massive, each one the size of a small building. They moved with perfect coordination, circling the station like predators surrounding wounded prey. "The Hollow does not negotiate," said, her voice tight with fear. "They do not take prisoners, they just exterminate." "I know," replied calmly. "I fought them at Colony. They destroyed our entire defensive fleet, killed 20,000 soldiers in the first hour." "You survived." "I always survive." The lift opened onto Deck 12. This was far below the diplomatic levels, in the guts of the station where maintenance crews worked and cargo was sorted. The corridors were dim and narrow, lit only by emergency lights that pulsed red with each alarm. Moved with purpose, like he had memorized every inch of this station, which realized he probably had. He had been working here for months as a cargo handler. He knew this place better than any delegate or admiral. He stopped at a heavy metal locker marked emergency equipment. The lock was digital, requiring a security code. Punched the wall next to the locker. The metal dented inward, exposing wiring behind the panel. He grabbed 2 wires, twisted them together, and the locker door clicked open. Inside were tools, heavy industrial tools designed for emergency repairs. Plasma cutters for slicing through damaged hull sections. Hull sealant grenades for patching breaches. Magnetic clamps for zero-gravity work. Began selecting items with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. "These are not weapons," said. "Everything is a weapon if you know how to use it." He held up a plasma cutter. "This can slice through hollow armor just as easily as it cuts hull plating." He picked up a heavy metal bar used for prying open stuck doors. "And this can crush a drone's sensor cluster if you hit it hard enough." He handed a smaller plasma cutter. "Stay behind me. If anything metal with glowing blue lights comes at you, point this at its center mass and squeeze the trigger." "I am a diplomat," protested. "I am not trained for combat." Looked at her. For a moment his expression softened. "Neither was I," he said. "Not at first. I was a farmer's son from a small village. I did not know how to fight. But the Korean War came and suddenly everyone was a soldier." He paused. "You learn or you die. And since dying is not an option for me, I learned very quickly." Another explosion rocked the station. This one was closer. The lights flickered and died, leaving only the red emergency strips glowing along the floor. "They are inside," said quietly. "The drones have breached the hull." He started moving again, but not toward the escape pods. He was heading toward the sounds of destruction. "What are you doing?" demanded, following despite her fear. "The evacuation shuttles are the other way." "The evacuation routes are where the Hollow will strike first. They want to prevent escape. If we go that way, we run straight into them." Glanced back at her. "Besides, someone needs to draw their attention away from the civilians." "You are going to fight them, alone." "I am going to slow them down, buy time for the escape pods to launch, for the coalition fleet to respond." He stopped at a junction where 3 corridors met. "And I am not alone. You are here." Before could respond, she heard it. A mechanical clicking sound, like metal legs on metal floor. It was coming from the left corridor, getting closer. Pushed her behind a cargo crate and pressed himself against the wall. He held his plasma cutter ready. the blade not yet ignited. The first hollow drone emerged from the shadows. It was horrifying. A mass of metal and cables shaped roughly like a spider, but wrong in ways that made its brain hurt to look at. Its body was covered in sensors that glowed pale blue. Its legs ended in sharp points that left marks on the floor as it walked. And it was not alone. Behind it came two more, then three more, an entire swarm filling the corridor with clicking metal sounds. Did not move, he barely seemed to breathe. The lead drone passed within 2 meters of their hiding spot. Its sensors swept the area, blue lights flickering. It paused. For one terrible second, was certain it had found them. Then it continued forward, leading its swarm toward the upper decks where the evacuation was happening. Waited until the last drone passed. Then he stepped out silently and followed them. Watched in disbelief as he moved like a shadow behind the swarm. He did not attack the main group. Instead, he targeted the stragglers, the ones at the back that had fallen slightly behind. His plasma cutter ignited with a soft hiss. The blade glowed orange-white, hot enough to cut through almost anything. He swung it in a precise arc, slicing through the rear drone's central processing unit before it could send an alert. The machine collapsed silently. The others continued forward unaware. Moved to the next one, then the next. Each kill was quick, clean, and utterly silent. He was not fighting like a soldier. He was hunting like a predator. Found herself following him, plasma cutter clutched in her trembling hands. She did not know why. Perhaps because staying hidden alone felt more terrifying than staying near him. They followed the swarm through 3 more sections of the station, eliminated 11 drones without alerting the others. Each time, he waited for the perfect moment. Each time, his blade found exactly the right spot. Then they reached the evacuation deck. The scene was chaos. Dozens of delegates were crowded around the escape pod bay, pushing and fighting to get aboard. Coalition guards were trying to maintain order, but they were overwhelmed. And between the civilians and safety, the hollow swarm had arrived. The drones spread out, blocking every exit. Their weapons began to charge, glowing blue light building at the ends of their limbs. Was there, shouting commands. Commander had drawn her sidearm and was firing at the nearest drone, but her shots were barely scratching its armor. Stepped out of the corridor behind the swarm. "Hey," he said. His voice was not loud. It should not have carried over the screaming and the alarms and the weapons fire. But somehow, every drone heard it. Every blue sensor turned toward him at exactly the same moment. Raised his plasma cutter. "Come and get me." The swarm turned away from the civilians and charged toward him. Watched as walked backward into the corridor, drawing the entire swarm after him like a shepherd leading wolves away from sheep. He moved with strange calm, like this was just another day, just another fight, just another moment in an endless series of moments. The guard stared in shock, was screaming orders, was shouting something, but was already gone, vanishing into the darkness of the maintenance levels with an army of killing machines following behind him. Ran to the evacuation deck. "Get the pods launched," she shouted, "now before they come back." Grabbed her arm. "Where is he going?" "He is drawing them away, buying us time." "That is suicide." Looked at with eyes that had seen too much in the last hour. "For anyone else maybe, but he cannot die. He told me so himself." She paused, remembering tired eyes. "He has tried." The escape pods began launching. One after another, they broke away from the station and accelerated toward safety. Coalition rescue ships were already approaching, responding to the distress signal. But somewhere in the depths of the station, a man who had survived 2 centuries of war was fighting alone against an enemy that had destroyed entire worlds. And for the first time in over 100 years, was not trying to survive. He was trying to save everyone else. The maintenance levels became a maze of darkness and death. led the drones deeper and deeper into the station, away from the evacuation routes, away from the innocent people trying to escape. He killed when he could, ran when he had to, used every trick he had learned in 200 years of warfare. He collapsed corridors behind him. He vented sections into space. He lured groups of drones into traps and destroyed them with improvised explosives. But there were too many. For every drone he destroyed, two more seemed to take its place. Eventually, inevitably, he found himself cornered, the reactor level, the heart of the station. Behind him was the main reactor core, humming with barely contained energy. In front of him, blocking the only exit, was the largest swarm of hollow drones he had ever seen. Looked at the reactor. He looked at the drones. He thought about all the people he had saved in the last hour, all the escape pods that had launched because he bought them time. He thought about who had died in his arms on Titan, about his childhood friend who never came home from Vietnam, about all the names and faces that haunted his dreams. Then he thought about, young, scared, but brave enough to follow him into hell, brave enough to survive. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe this much radiation, this much energy, this much destruction would finally be enough. He almost smiled at the thought. Walked toward the reactor controls. The drones surged forward, but they were too slow. His fingers found the override panel. "For everyone who died beside me," he whispered, "and for everyone who gets to live because of this." He initiated the overload. The reactor core began to scream. Energy built up beyond safe levels. Warning lights flashed everywhere. The explosion would create an EMP powerful enough to fry every hollow drone on the station. It would also release enough radiation to kill any organic being within a kilometer. Sealed the door behind him. He stood alone in the reactor room, surrounded by enemies, waiting for the end. The drones tried to break through, but they were too late. The reactor exploded. Light and fire and death washed over everything. And in the center of it all, finally closed his eyes, hoping that this time, maybe this time, he would not wake up.